Okay, so I wish I had gone right after Mead because it would have been a nice segue into the more detailed mechanics of sediment transport and particulate organic carbon transport, but it was nice to hear from everyone else. So I'm really motivated to do my research to understand what factors regulate terrestrial organic carbon delivery and burial in the coastal ocean. So if you look at this image of the Ganges-Brahmaputra Delta, you can see that sediment has many pathways that it takes through the delta. And depending on sediment transport dynamics, that will determine what organic carbon gets trapped in the subaerial delta versus what is exported to the prodelta and the shelf. So the fate of particulate organic carbon, or POC, in deltas is inherently linked to the fate of sediment. So I think we really need to guide our research in directions that link both sediment and particulate organic matter. And we study them together and not separate. And so this is just as an example. A sediment and POC are paired together from the erosion of continents. This is from Valier-Galli's work, looking at global suspended sediment yields and how they correlate with the global yields of particulate organic carbon from rivers. And to sedimentation at the seabed. So clearly, burial efficiency of organic carbon at the seabed is a function of the net sediment accumulation rate. And so it's really important that we study these things together and try to understand how, I guess, the details of how sediment and organic carbon are transported. But this isn't always easy, right? So particulate organic carbon is often a complex mixture of both labile organic matter that breaks down relatively quickly and recalcitrant organic matter that is more stable in Earth's surface environments. For example, POC can be in the form of rock organic carbon or kerogen, which can survive many cycles of erosion, transport, and deposition. And then there's mineral-associated organic carbon, which a few of our speakers have already touched on. This is where minerals can actually protect POC from and inhibit decomposition. And then, of course, there's fresh labile organic matter like leaf litter that turns over rapidly in the environment. So when we look at river sediment, you have to imagine that it consists of a wide range of particulate organic matter. And river sediment also has a wide range of grain sizes. And that also influences how much POC is exported from river systems to the coast. And this is just another figure from Valier-Galli's work showing the total organic carbon content and its relationship with grain size, where finer particles have more organic carbon in general. And so this is important for the transport of POC through river systems and through deltas because finer particles have lower settling velocities than coarser particles. And so you can see here the wide range of settling velocities of particles of different diameters. And so mud has a slower settling velocity than sand, and so it will be transported higher in the water column. And this is important for things like Mead was talking about, like overbank deposition. That finer mud is going to be, has a higher probability of being deposited in overbanks and in levees, whereas sand might be transported more efficiently through delta systems during those remobilization events. Just the main question that I'm trying to answer is, how does hydrodynamic sorting by particle size and density influence how fluvial particulate organic carbon is exported and what its fate is in river deltas and coastal systems? And so I think our research community now is at a great time and has great opportunities to integrate what we know about particulate organic carbon into models of sediment transport through deltas. This is an example of the Dorado model, which is coming out of Paolo Passalacqua's group at UT Austin. And they're actually integrating the different settling velocities of different particles into their sediment transport models. And so this is an example of how different types of particles might settle or be distributed in the water column. And so if we can characterize how particulate organic carbon is distributed in the water column, we can then better model how it gets transported through deltas. I'm going to talk about data today from the Bermejo River, which is in Argentina. This is clearly not a delta, but it's an excellent test bed for studying fluvial sediment transport processes. And that's because it has this really long reach with no tributaries. And so I'm able to sort of track a parcel of sediment moving downstream through this river system and look at how processes like downstream grain size finding or lateral migration of the river might change the particle size distribution and the POC content. All right, so I think it's really important to collect a lot of observational data to try to answer these research questions. And so a lot of the work I do is in the field collecting suspended sediment samples from rivers. And what's particularly useful is to have depth profile samples from the water column so that we can capture the full range of particle size and character in the river systems. And so we collect this river water and then we filter it to be able to analyze the particulate organic carbon in the river. All right, and so I'm just briefly going to show sort of bulk data. So this is distance downstream along the Bermejo River. And this is particulate organic carbon content on the y-axis. And the different colors and shapes represent different size classes. And so you can see that those tan triangles are less than 10 microns, really fine particles, clay-rich. They seem to have higher organic carbon content than these coarser size fractions. So that's just a takeaway. Finer fractions contain more POC. And we find that these fine fractions also contain older POC. So we can do radiocarbon dating, sort of measure the radiocarbon content of the POC in these samples to get sort of an estimate of how old that organic matter is. And so generally what we see is this grain size fractionation. But what I'm more interested in is why we see this fractionation among grain sizes. How is carbon partitioned among these size classes? And so I'm going to talk about some tools that aren't typically applied to river sediment research. So I've used SEM and nanosims, so scanning electron microscopy, to really look at this particulate organic matter in detail. And then nanosims, which can actually map out the concentration of, or the relative concentration of carbon in these samples. And I'm going to run through this kind of quickly. But there's pretty pictures of particulate organic matter from river sediment. And we predominantly find that there are two pools of particulate organic carbon. The first pool is just these discrete organic particles. We consider these to be pieces of plants that are very labile. This is what one of those particles looks like in an SEM image. And on the top left here is the map of carbon. And we can also map carbon nitrogen, and we can use aluminum as a proxy for the mineral content in these particles. And we see that these discrete organic particles have different sizes and shapes and nature, but in general, they're very coarse. This is a 4 micron scale in these images. So this is coarse particulate organic matter. And we also see a second pool of organic carbon that seems to be associated with minerals. And so here we find that a lot of these clay minerals that are less than 4 microns in diameter tend to aggregate. And whether this is formed in soils or formed in the river, I think is an open question. But this carbon seems to be stabilized by clay minerals. And it's also very nitrogen rich, which may suggest microbial contributions. And so I'm going to run through this quickly, but we just see this, these clay minerals and the carbon associated with them in most of our samples. So I'm using this data, this qualitative data, to try to inform more quantitative estimates of carbon fluxes in rivers. And so we can calculate the fluxes of this fine fraction of organic material versus a more coarse fraction. In this case, we're just separating the clay from everything else. And assuming that mineral-associated organic carbon is only in that clay fraction. And then we can look at how that changes through transport. And what we see is that there seems to be preferential transport of this fine clay organic matter as we move downstream through river systems and possibly through deltas into the coastal ocean. And so studies like this, I think, can be very helpful for understanding how particulate organic carbon is sorted and routed through river, delta, coastal systems. And I'm done over time, so thank you.